Now we come to lesson 9, irreducible complexity. We'll be talking about the flagellum motor, vomiter beetle, and procreation. Well, I want to refer you back is this is most of this information comes from the Discovery Institute, and this is the link to the trailer that I had referenced before in a previous lesson on sequencing amino acids and the probability of that happening. And now we're going to the other aspect of that video, which is the irreducible complexity. So when you go to the link, just click under the clips, and you'll see the one for irreducible complexity. If you don't have this video in your library, you're really missing out. I highly recommend it, and if you go to it and decide to purchase it, just let them know that you got the information from John McCamick from Truth University LLC. I do not make any money off of this. I just want you to have it because I think it's that important if you really want to know the truth. Now, I mentioned before the bias in reference material. Now, when I was a child, if I went to the encyclopedia, I had a set of encyclopedias, and I would go to them and I want to look up irreducible complexity, it would talk about irreducible complexity. But today, just to show you that how much bias there is, this is irreducible complexity from Wikipedia, which is a free encyclopedia. And right at the very beginning, it says irreducible complexity involves the idea that certain biological systems cannot evolve by successive small modifications to pre-existing functional systems through natural selection. Irreducible complexity has become central to the creationist concept of intelligent design. But now they go into the but. They jump right into the negative aspect of what irreducible complexity, the complications of that. But the scientific community, which regards intelligent design as pseudoscience, rejects the concept of irreducible complexity. So right off the bat, they go negative. So then they continue. Creation science presented the theological argument for design with assertions that evolution could not explain complex molecular machines. And in 1993, Michael Behe, a professor of biochemistry at Lehigh University, presented these arguments in a revised version of the school textbook on pandas and people. In his 1996 book, Darwin's Black Box, he called the concept irreducible complexity and said it made evolution through the natural selection of random mutations impossible. Then they go and continue on by saying this was based on a mistaken assumption that the evolution relies on improvement of existing functions, ignoring how complex adaptations originate from the changes in function and disregarding public research. Evolutionary biologists have published rebuttals showing how systems discussed by Behe can evolve, and examples documented through comparative genomics show that complex molecular systems are formed by the addition of components as revealed by different temporal origins of their proteins. In the 2005 Kilmer versus Dover Area School District trial, Behe gave testimony on the subject of irreducible complexity. The court found that Professor Behe's claim for irreducible complexity has been refuted in prior review research papers and has been rejected by the scientific community at large. Give me a break. Okay, so the very beginning of this is the whole, like 2/3 of the introduction to irreducible complexity is negative against irreducible complexity. I mean, it's better just telling me what irreducible complexity is. They beat it up. Wikipedia has made a point that they have sided with the people that are against irreducible complexity just by their how they presented this, and this is terrible. I don't really care about peer review. I mean, that's part of the issue. I need to look at that and review some of those. Well, 1,000 people in the academia could say that this does not work, and only 2 say that it does work. But if it does work, how can they refute it? How can they haven't refuted irreducible complexity? They've just regarded it as pseudoscience and whatever. But I'll go more into detail on how upset I am with this, and to show you how a bias Wikipedia is throughout all their material. You've got to learn how to read through the bias to get to the points of what I'm trying to get across as far as irreducible complexity. Now, hopefully, people don't just begin. Most people just read the first 2 or 3 paragraphs and they move on because of our throwaway society instead of reading the whole thing. For instance, at the very beginning of this irreducible complexity by Wikipedia, you'll see this word emergence. If you click on the word emergence, you'll find the following. It talks about weak emergence and strong emergence, which is basically microevolution, macroevolution. So if you get down to the strong emergence, and it says some thinkers question the plausibility of strong emergence as contriving our unusual understanding of physics. Although strong emergence is logically possible, it is uncomfortably like magic. How does an irreducible but subservient downward causal power arise, since by definition it cannot be due to the aggregation of micro-level potentialities? In other words, how can macroevolution find its way to being developed with microevolution? Basically, it cannot be through small successive modifications, as Darwin says. It just pops into the reality, and it's like almost like magic. But and microevolution cannot explain that. Such causal powers would be quite unlike anything within our scientific ken. This not only indicates how they will discomfort reasonable forms of materialism, their mysteriousness will only heighten the traditional worry that emergence entails illegitimately getting something from nothing. So how can they explain this? And they're saying that they can't explain this. And I do want to make sure that I give Answers in Genesis. This website, a plug is down below, as you'll see, because it is dealing with Genesis, which is what my focus is. So let me continue this discussion by taking to the end of Irreducible Complexity by George Purdom. Pre-adaptation is another just so evolutionary story that attempts to avoid the problems of necessary information gain and the goalless nature of evolution. It fails to answer how parts that are intermediate between their old and new functions would be selected for and accumulated to build a molecular machine. Michael Gray, cell biologist at Dalhousie University, states, "You look at cellular machines and say, why on earth would biology do something like this? It's too bizarre." But when you think about it in a natural evolutionary fashion, in which these molecular machines emerged before there was a need for them, then it makes sense. It only makes sense if you start with the presupposition that evolution is true and confer powers of mutation and natural selection that the evidence shows they do not have. So in other words, let me explain it because this is critical. Information, the DNA, the RNA, that do the sequencing of amino acids and cause them how to fold, and so you have all these proteins that are made through this process of the sequencing of amino acids make proteins, and all those proteins come together to form, say, a heart, and they're designed to make that heart. And then there's other proteins that make the lungs, and another protein that makes the liver, and there's all these other proteins that make the veins and the arteries and the nerves and all these, and they all connected together. So the assimilation, the assembly of all these materials, also all that information is in this thing called DNA. So in evolution, it's goalless. Mother Nature doesn't sit around and say, well, I need that part and that part and that part, and this would be good. Okay, and then collects all that. That's not natural selection. That's not how natural selection works. Natural selection, an ideal of that would be you've got a birch tree that's kind of white in color, and you got a white butterfly on it, and then over time this pollution collects on the tree and makes the tree dark, and now that white butterfly goes on that dark tree, and all of a sudden the birds can see the white one, they can't see the dark butterfly, so now the white ones are eliminated, and the dark ones, it's just the opposite. When it was white, when the tree was white, the dark ones got eaten, and the white, so nature selects in that, but it doesn't actually say, well, I'm going to pick this versus that. No, it's the environment itself that causes that selection to happen, but we cause some of that problems, for instance, pollution. But it's not like nature sits around with a mind and thinks, well, I want this and this, then collects it and makes a machine. It's ridiculous. That's not the way but I think some people look at it that way, but it isn't. So nature, evolution is goalless. It doesn't have a goal set up, and because goals take information, and information comes from DNA, and where does DNA come from? And the evolutionary people have a very difficult way of trying to come up with what in the world is DNA and how did that come about. They start with RNA. They say, well, there's a bunch of this RNA, and they came together and made it. No, that's, even the RNA itself is so complicated. It's a fool's game, I mean, in my opinion. So this guy's article is great, because what they've done is they started with the presupposition that evolution is true. Amen. That's it. Because so then when you go back to the fossils, and then you got the Cambrian explosion, there's a big gap between the two. There's two ways you can do it. You can extrapolate it up from the fossils up to the Cambrian explosion, extrapolate up and try to make that connection between those two and fill in the gap. Or you can reverse engineer, start with the Cambrian explosion and reverse engineer down to the fossils. Either way, it's not proven. They're using the extrapolation or reverse engineering to try to fill in these gaps that they cannot do. And they try to make it sound logical and experimental, but it's not. There's no proven proof for this filling in the gap. For in this case, the DNA and understanding DNA and information gain and a goalless evolutionary process. And they start with the presupposition that evolution is true in their way of thinking that it is true. It is true as far as microevolution within the species, but not macroevolution. So just to show you how biased this Wikipedia is on this thing, we're going to be talking about the evolution of the flagella. Now the flagella, hopefully you watched that video and you saw how irreducible complexity, and especially the flagella motor, was created through the process with DNA. It has to be DNA. The information has to be DNA in order for that all to, especially not just the parts, but the assembly of those parts. So if you look at the evolution of flagella on Wikipedia, it says nothing about irreducible complexity. It's not even mentioned in that. Remember how it was negative? You start with irreducible complexity and you want to hear about irreducible complexity. They show all the negative aspects of irreducible complexity, but now you go to the evolution of flagella, you don't see anything about irreducible complexity, because that'd be negative against what they're trying to promote here. But they're just going to promote it without putting in the negatives. Why? Why does it go one way but not the other way? They should have irreducible complexity that says, well, not everybody agrees with this evolution of the flagella as stated, but because there are people that believe in irreducible complexity with the creationist, and you should look at that. But they don't mention it at all. So that shows you the other side, the bias. There's no bias here because, well, once again, they've taken the concept that evolution is true. That's the presupposition. Now let's turn our attention to the bombardier beetle under Wikipedia. The first couple of paragraphs just tells you a little bit about the mechanism, but then the third paragraph of the opening, it says, the beetle's unusual defense mechanism is claimed by some creationists to be an example of what they call irreducible complexity. Though this is refuted by evolutionary biologists, the system has also been cited by ancient astronaut theorists to support hypotheses of alleged genetic engineering by advanced extraterrestrials. You see what they're doing? Remember they talked about pseudoscience with irreducible complexity before, and now we're talking about the bombardier beetle with its irreducible complexity. So now they're going to try to tie it to extraterrestrials. This is pseudoscience. This is like ridiculous, and it's terrible what they try to do. Just tell us what the irreducible complexity and the complexity and why these other people are saying this. Anyway, so continue on down to the same Wikipedia on the bombardier beetle. We find the evolution of the defense mechanism. The full evolutionary history of the beetle's unique defense system is unknown, the keyword unknown, but, and there's always behind the but that counts, this is what they really want you to know, is but the biologists have shown that the system could have evolved from defenses found in other beetles in incremental steps by natural selection. Specifically, so they go on to talk about these things, but you need to look at these things like could have, should have, might have when you're reading, and that's the point that I wanted to make in this particular area. But they start off with the positive for irreducible complexity, and the uniqueness of this defense system is unknown, but they're going to tell you their own bias. And as we continue on in this one section of the bombardier beetle, the mechanism, it says at the very end of it, it says the unique combination of features of the bombardier beetle's defense mechanism, strongly exothermic reaction, boiling hot fluids, and explosive release, has been claimed by creationists and proponents of intelligent design to be an example of irreducible complexity. Biologists such as taxidermist Mark Isaacs note, however, that the step-by-step evolution of mechanism can readily have occurred. Again, throwing in their bias at the end, I don't know, step-by-step has not been proven, even in regards to what they say. And we're going to talk more about that right now. I wanted to highlight the bias before I gave you the data to show you why I set this website up. Remember my prime objective, Truth University, dedicated to providing alternative data so you'll be better informed to determine what is truth. So I'm really trying to fight this bias by giving you the alternative understanding of the subject matter. So I guess the best way to try to review this to see which is right, the evolutionary step-by-step process or this irreducible complexity that had been by design. We look at this diagram from the University of Queensland. It shows one gland, singular, produces both chemicals. Now, why is that important? Well, if one gland can produce both chemicals, that would fit in more into the evolutionary process. And it's not as complicated as, well, what really does happen. Well, let's look at what really does happen. In this article by Science Magazine, you'll find that there are two chemicals. And so the other one did say two chemicals, but in different glands. Plural, two large chambers, plural, reservoirs, plural, each gland. So there's more than one gland. There's not one gland that creates two chemicals. It's two glands that create each one their own chemical. So what's the best way to prove this? Is well, let's just look at the actual X-ray of a bombardier beetle. Oh wow, look, it looks like there's two glands with that make the two chemicals. And here's the graphic next to it that makes it a little more clear, so exactly what's going on. The two glands are making two different chemicals, and those chemicals come together to mix into a mixing chamber, and then go into get oxidized, and then it goes out the posterior of the bug. Well, why is this so critical, John? Well, if it was just one sac making both chemicals, it could be perhaps explained by the evolutionary process. But with two sacs creating two chemicals independent of one another, then how do they know? Okay, so it took one of them 1 billion years to evolve. They've got a chemical. Well, wait a minute. There's no advantage to the bug. For one chemical, you have to have the other chemical. Okay, because the other chemical also has 1 billion years to evolve. But now, wait a minute. Well, you got two chemicals that have evolved in separate sacs. There's still no advantage to the bug until they're mixed. Okay, so now we mix them. Oops, they explode, or they hit the oxygen and they explode. Oh, that's not too good for the bug. All right, now, so we have to have maybe a retardant or something, or some kind of a way to for it to have momentary pause before it gets thrown out the posterior. There's a lot of engineering going on here. There's a lot of things going on. It could not have happened in this way. The irreducible complexity of the bombardier beetle is unrefuted. There's no way that they can explain this. And what they try to do is they try to talk about co-option. Now let me talk to you about something that's referred to as co-option. Co-option says that the parts, for instance, to the flagella motor were in different other machines already in existence, and that they co-opted, they took from those and made the flagella motor. But that becomes a problem with assembly. Even with all those proteins coming together to make that one part, you still have to have the assembly. And they're saying, well, nature put all these things together, or the flagella itself put all these things together. Well, I need this, I need that, I need that. But this is ridiculous. I mean, think about the complexity of this. I hope you saw that video, because of the complexity of this, and to think that Mother Nature, Mother Nature is like a thinking entity could say, well, okay, we need all these things, and it puts it together. No, that's not the way it works. I tried to explain that to you already, but this is called co-option. Co-option says, yeah, maybe there's some parts that are similar, but not maybe exactly. They came together to make this thing called the flagella motor. So this is co-option. So you got pieces here, pieces there. You got the hook, the L ring, the rod, the P ring, the MS ring, the C ring, type different systems, cell wall, the stator, the junction box, the hook, the filament, the tip, all these parts everywhere, and they all came together because it was needed. Well, now this happens slowly over a long period of time, say 1,000,000 or 1,000,000,000 years. But what's the advantage to the flagella? We're laying on the bottom of the ocean while this machine is being built so they can propel itself around. It's the most ridiculous thing when you really think about it. A child can understand that. All the parts come together to form very complicated, very sophisticated flagella motor. And now we come to one of the perhaps the most difficult for them to explain and easy for us to explain, that believes in creation of God, that was the designer and created the DNA, is this thing called reproduction, or procreation. Of course, we hear about the thing of what came first, the chicken or the egg. Now we understand that there's no such thing. It can't have been infinite regress. In other words, the chicken and the egg have always been that way. What came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, we don't know, because it's been infinitely that way. Well, both sides of the issue say no to that, because we both agree that there was a beginning. The people that believe in evolution believe in the Big Bang, and the people that believe in creation believe that God created. So there's a beginning. So there's no such thing as infinite regress. There's got to be one or the other. There was a beginning. So which came first? Well, a lot of people say that the egg was first. People like Neil deGrasse Tyson. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? The egg, laid by a bird that was not a chicken. That doesn't answer the question. What came first, the animal that laid the egg, or the egg? And you get away from this understanding of chicken. There's other ones that came up and said, well, this fish came along and got close to the shore, and the eggs of the fish came up on shore, and those eggs eventually evolved into a chicken. Well, what about the fish and the egg? What came first, the fish or the egg? That doesn't answer the question. You keep just pushing it back further, but that doesn't answer the question. You still have the problem of what came first, the fish or the egg. Now let's just talk about that. Let me just do a little mind thing with you. Okay, so you've got a person that is going to evolve, and over billions of years, a male evolves, and that male is able to fend for itself, and it comes out as it starts out as evolves as a baby, and that baby is going to fend for itself for food and clothing and the elements and the diseases and whatever, and finally one makes it to adulthood. Great. So it looks around and says, now what? Well, it dies because, well, we need a female. Oh yeah, that's right. We need a female. Okay, so another billion years goes by, and we got a male and a female, and they both are evolving into adulthood, but they're 2,000 miles apart. They don't meet each other, so they both die. Oh, that's right. They have to be in close proximity to one another. Okay, so now the male, babies, and then finally we get another male. There's an adult and a female that evolves and has to be a male, and they're in close proximity to each other, but the male's 100 years old and get ready to die just as the female being born. Oh, they have to be the same age, approximately the same age. Doggone it. All right, listen, wait another billion years. Okay, now I've finally got a male that's got grown and a female that's grown, and they're close proximity to each other, and they're approximately the same age, and they come together, and well, what about the equipment? Now, how did my equipment know that your equipment matches? I mean, how did that happen? We evolved separately from one another. It's just like, that's very interesting. Well, but let's suppose that it did. All right, so they come together and they procreate, they make a baby, and yahoo, humanity is started. But now, wait a minute. Just because we've procreated and have babies, what's stopping this evolution out here from still having people that are being created that were not created from through the process of procreation? Now, in this discussion, let's look at another example. This one is what came first, the chicken or the egg? In Wikipedia, again, we see the scientific solution. This is the part that's under a scientific solution. It says, although the question is typically used metaphorically, evolutionary biology provides literal answers made possible by the Darwinian principle that species evolve over time, and thus that chickens had ancestors that were not chickens, similar to the view expressed by the Greek philosopher Alexander when addressing the paradox. If the question refers to eggs in general, the egg came first. The first egg, that is, a hard-shelled egg that could be laid on land rather than remaining in the water like the eggs of the fish or amphibians, appeared around 312 million years ago. In contrast, chickens are domesticated descendants of red junglefowl and probably arose a little more than 8,000 years ago at most. Now, I always look for qualifiers. That's why I highlighted could be, probably, rather than. Those are not literal. Those are not definite results of anything. It's just rather than, perhaps, maybe. So I always look for those qualifiers. But here, Wikipedia makes no doubt that they are biased. They have said that the egg came first. And let's continue on in this discussion further down. Continuing. If the question refers to chickens' eggs specifically, the answer is still the egg, but the explanation is more complicated. The process by which the chicken arose through the inbreeding and domestication of multiple species of wild junglefowl is poorly understood. And the point at which this evolving organism became a chicken is somewhat arbitrary distinction. whatever criteria one chooses. An animal nearly identical to the modern chicken, proto-chicken, laid a fertilized egg that had DNA identical to the modern chicken due to mutations in the mother's ovum and the father's sperm, or the fertilized zygote, but more simply by Neil deGrasse Tyson. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? The egg, laid by a bird that was not a chicken. All right, so here, let's look at some of these qualifiers. If, starts right off with if, and then the first A distinctly says the answer is still the egg, but the explanation is more complicated and poorly understood, and it's an arbitrary distinction. Whatever criteria one chooses, well, I choose a different criteria. But he just says, whatever criteria, they make up my mind for me. I don't think so. I have a different distinction. I have different, choose a different criteria. My criteria is that I do not start with a presupposition that evolution is true, or at least microevolution doesn't become macroevolution. Here, you're taking a, okay, my question is, what came first, the chicken or the egg? But what they're saying, well, the chicken didn't really come, there's something that came before the chicken. Well, and whatever that was before the chicken, whatever you want to call it, what came first, that bird or the egg? It's still that you pushed it back, um, but into a regress. But you still had the question of what came first, that egg or the bird. So that doesn't solve the question; it just pushes the question back. That doesn't answer the question. So continuing. It has been suggested that the actions of the protein found in the modern chicken egg may make the answer different. In the uterus, chickens produce OC17, which causes the formation of the thickened calcium carbonate shell around their eggs. Because OC17 is expressed by the hen and not the egg, the bird in which the protein first arose, though having hatched from the non-reinforced egg, would then have laid the first egg, having such a reinforced shell. The chicken would have preceded this first modern chicken egg. However, the presence of OC17 or a homologue in other species, such as turkeys and finches, suggests that such eggshell reinforcing protein are common to all birds and thus long predated the first chicken. So again, they're going back to this fact that what came first, chicken or the egg? Well, the chicken really didn't come first. There were other. Well, okay, let's take the other bird. Whatever bird that was first. Which came first, that bird or the egg? And now they're saying, well, the chicken or this bird laid a non-reinforced egg, and the protein that was in them later on created this OC17 hard-shelled carbon carbonate shell around the egg. That's just a lot of dancing, in my opinion. Um, some people will say that in a very simple beginning organism, that it was asexual and had both sexes, and they split apart, and that's why those two, even though they evolve separately, they are connected together and already have all the information. And but that goes back to DNA. Each of those pieces, those male and the female that split apart, that they were asexual, then it would still have the DNA. It still comes back to information with design, with the purpose. Now, I want you to do some of your own research. Just look under evolution and look up in particular the origin of DNA from the beginning. They usually start with RNA that developed into DNA, then count the number of unsure qualifiers such as maybe, perhaps, could be. I think it'll be a little eye-opening for you once you start focusing on that. So in trying to determine the truth, regardless of what the subject matter is, always beware of reference and academia bias, extrapolation, reverse engineering, unsure qualifiers, and changing the focus. Make sure they stay on task. Why was Charles Darwin so popular? He was not the pioneer of evolutionary theories. A whole bunch of people came before him, like his grandfather's father, his father's friend, Charles Lyell. So why was he so popular? I believe it's because he changed the terminology from random chance and mutation to natural selection. Because natural selection implies that something is doing the selecting, and in this case, nature, or in some people's mind, Mother Nature. So this is very popular, of course, amongst the people that are known as pantheists. Pantheists believe that nature and God and the universe, everything is just one. Where so you're God, I'm God. Well, there's two things I know: I'm not God, and you're not God. So to me, that's nonsense. So so this natural selection. Does nature really select? Is the question. So we go back to this thing of the butterfly or the moth that the bird eats. If it's on a birch tree and it's a dark moth, the bird will see the moth and eat the dark one and not the light one because he can't see the light one. Pollution causes the tree to become dark, and now the bird eats the white moth instead of the black one because he can see it. Is he really selecting between the black and the white moth? No, he's just reacting to stimuli. So here's my contribution to this study. Evolution is reactive, not proactive. Evolution only reacts to environmental stimuli. Intelligence is proactive. Intelligence creates data arranged into useful information to design for a purpose. Huge, huge difference. So Mother Nature does not select. It reacts. So the things in nature react to stimuli, to the environmental stimuli. And that changes evolution over a long period of time within the species, like, for instance, microevolution. Now, Charles Darwin was also famous because of his intricate note taking and his preciseness and his presentation, especially on the Galapagos Islands. And it was very instrumental and beneficial in the area of microevolution, but not macroevolution. And to try to say that macroevolution, the only thing that you have to get some kind of intelligence in there. So by him saying natural selection, makes it sound like it's intelligence, that nature has some type of intelligence, but it does not. It reacts to stimuli. So evolution reacts to stimuli, and intelligence creates for purpose. Major difference. Understand that, and you'll understand the lesson I'm trying to get across. And now you know more of the story. Stay tuned. This is John McCamick with Truth University. Good day.